Hello everyone. In a previous video we have studied about the adaptation for the self-pollination and cross-pollination. In today's video we will study about what adaptations a plant should undertake in order to help the anemophily type of pollination. We know that anemophily is a type of pollination where wind is the agency which helps in the pollination. So, what features does the pollen grain should possess in order to help the wind for pollination? The first important adaptation is the pollen grains must be light in weight so that they can be easily carried with the help of the wind. The second important adaptation is that the pollen grains must be powdery. Only when they are powdery they can be easily carried by the wind, and it must be unwettable. Only if they are unwettable they can be easily carried by the wind. If they are wet, they become heavy and they cannot be carried by the wind because they settle down. The third important adaptation is that the pollen grains which are produced must be produced in large number. For example, cannabis. One flower of cannabis produces 5 lakh pollen grains. The fourth important adaptation is that certain plants will produce anthers which have wings. For example, pine, which is a gymnosperm which produce the anthers, that is the pollen grains, which possess wings. So we can see a cloud. We know that pollen grains are generally yellow in color, and we have the yellow cloud-like appearance in the pine forest, and this yellow is sulfur yellow, and we call this cloud as sulfur cloud. Next, let us see the adaptation of anther and the stigma. What are the adaptation of the anther? First, it must be exposed anther. We have already studied in the dimorphic heterostyle pin and thumb. In the thumb is a condition where the flowers will have a long filament so that the anthers will be exposed, and which helps in easy carrying of the pollen grains, which is an adaptation for cross-pollination. So, exposed anther is one condition where the anemophilous type of pollination can take place. The second important adaptation, we know that there are different types of anthers. The one among them is a versatile anther, which is disc-like, and it can easily float, and it can be easily moved with the help of the wind. With this movement, and the pollen grains will be easily carried by the wind. The next thing is the adaptation of stigma. Exposed stigma, we have seen in case of oxalis and in case of viola, that exposed stigma, that is in pink kind of flowers, the stigma is exposed, that is it will have long style so that the stigma will be exposed. The second important thing is that stigma should be sticky so that when the pollen grains can be easily settle on the stigma when it is being carried by the wind. The third feature is that it should have a feathery or a hairy stigma so that the pollen grains will be trapped by the stigma. The fourth important thing is that the flowers need not have to be bright color, or it need not have to produce any nectar or the scenting substances, so that these since wind is an agency, the flower need not have to be bright color because it need not have to attract any pollinators such as insects. So that these are certain adaptation in order to help the wind for pollination. Let me recall once again the features of the pollen grain. The pollen grain must be light in weight, it must be powdery, it must be produced in large substance, it must be unwettable, and some of the pollen grains will have wings, for example in case of pine. And anthers, it must have the exposed anther, such as we have seen in oxalis and viola. They have exposed anther in case of thumb flowers, and the versatile anthers. Next is the adaptation of stigma. The stigma must be exposed stigma, as we have seen in the pink flowers, and sticky stigma. The stigma should be sticky, and it should be feathery or hairy stigma. And the fourth thing is that the flowers do not have to be bright color, or it do not have to produce any nectar. In our next video, we will see if hydrophily is a mode of pollination, then what adaptation a plant should possess. Until then, happy learning from Edge to all.